So what if I told you that the single most important piece of software in the world isn't an operating system or a social network, but a tool that most people have never even heard of? Seriously, it's the invisible architecture that lets thousands of developers build the Linux kernel, that helps Google manage 2 billion, that's billion with a B, lines of code, and that powers pretty much every digital product you touch. We're talking about version control. And its story is a fascinating one, about a perfect solution that has now somehow become the problem.
This quote, this just nails it. It perfectly captures the world before version control. And to really get how revolutionary this technology was, you have to appreciate the pure, unmanaged chaos that came before it. It was a world where every single project was just one bad save away from total disaster.
So, what did this digital dark age actually feel like? Well, it was defined by constant friction, a ton of risk, and a development culture that was, frankly, hostile to the whole idea of teamwork. Okay, try to imagine writing a document with a dozen other people, but you've only got one physical copy. That was software development. Coordination meant literally shouting across the room, "Hey, are you editing the main file?" And if two people did work on the same file, the solution was often a pretty brutal, "Hey, you didn't make a lot of changes, did you? Because I really need to keep mine." Just like that, hours or even days of work could just vanish. Poof.
The only real defense anyone had was this manual, and let me tell you, deeply flawed system of saving endless copies of files. A project folder would just become this graveyard of confusion. You'd have main.c, main_fix.c, main_latest.c, and of course, the dreaded main_final_v2.c. There was no single source of truth, just a messy collection of files and some tribal knowledge about which one might actually be the one that works.
All this constant, low-level risk created a huge psychological burden on developers. I mean, instead of innovating, they were forced into these defensive positions. They were terrified to delete old code, so they just comment out these huge, obsolete blocks, leaving files totally cluttered and impossible to read. This wasn't just inefficient. It really created a culture of fear instead of bold experimentation. But out of this chaos, a series of tools started to pop up, each one a step towards sanity. The final leap, though, the one that really defines our modern era, was a distributed system born out of a crisis in the Linux kernel project, and its name was Git. You can really see a clear evolution in thinking here. We started with these local tools that basically put a digital lock on a file. Only one person could work at a time. Then came centralized systems like Subversion. They enabled collaboration over a network, which was great, but they also created this dangerous single point of failure. The third generation leap, led by Git, was to just blow that model up entirely by giving every single developer a full copy of the project's history. Now, before we go any further, we need to define the absolute heart of any version control system, the repository. You can think of it like a database or a vault that holds every single change ever made to a project. But a repository's true power, it goes way beyond being a simple backup. It is the project's living story, its collective memory. It doesn't just tell you what changed, it tells you who changed it, when they changed it, and most importantly, why they changed it. This turns it from just a tool into a really powerful communication protocol.
And this right here, this architectural leap from centralized to distributed, was the game changer. See, in a centralized system, saving your work and sharing it with the team were the exact same action. But with a distributed system like Git, they're separate. A commit is a private, local act of saving a snapshot. A push is a deliberate, public act of sharing. And that separation is what unlocked true offline capability and the freedom to experiment without risk.
Git was a masterpiece of design. It really was. It solved the problems of its time perfectly. But what happens when the world changes, and that perfect solution gets pushed way, way beyond its original purpose? Well, the monolith starts to crack. And this forces us to ask a really critical question. Git was built on this assumption that every developer needs a complete mirror of the entire project history. But is that assumption still true in a world of terabyte-sized datasets and planet-scale codebases? The first major crack appears with large files. See, Git is brilliant at handling text, storing only the tiny differences between versions. But for a video file or a 3D model or a machine learning dataset, any small change means saving a whole new copy. The repository bloats exponentially. The solution, something called Git LFS, is really just a patch. It bolts a separate, centralized server onto a distributed system, which brings back a single point of failure and creates massive data transfer costs.
The second crack is what's known as the Monorepo Paradox. The whole strategy of putting all of a company's code into one massive repository, pioneered by places like Google, it pushes Git's simple design to its absolute breaking point. Basic commands ground to a halt, and the workarounds, things like partial clones, are basically just sophisticated hacks that start to dismantle Git's core principle, and, in the process, they lock you into whichever vendor's hacks work the best.
So, this brings us to the climax of our story. These cracks aren't just minor flaws, They're signs of a fundamental paradigm shift. The era of having one single, all-encompassing version control tool, well, that era is ending.
So, the future isn't about finding a better Git. The whole monolithic idea of version control is actually breaking apart. It's deconstructing into a federated ecosystem. Git isn't being replaced. You could say it's being demoted to its proper role, as a low-level protocol, a foundation that a new generation of specialized tools can be built on.
This new world is being built in layers. At the core, yeah, Git is still the standard for source code, but specialized layers are popping up on top of it. A data layer uses tools to manage huge files outside of Git, but still uses Git to track the changes. There's even a semantic layer, with new systems that think differently. They track the change itself instead of the project state to prevent conflicts. And finally, a context layer integrates things like bug tracking and documentation directly with the code, because it recognizes that they're all part of the same story.
To really wrap our heads around this shift, we need to move beyond the technical jargon. We can understand this new world through a really powerful metaphor. This whole shift is best understood as a move from a cathedral to a bazaar. For years, version control has been this monolithic cathedral, one imposing, rigid structure with a single steep learning curve and all these mismatched extensions just bolted onto the side. The future is a federated bazaar, a vibrant, open marketplace built on a common foundation, where specialized stalls offer you the right tool for the right job, giving users choice, clarity, and the freedom to work together. And so, we're left with this final thought. For 50 years, we've been searching for a single, universal system to manage our digital creations. But maybe the ultimate lesson here is that the future of collaboration isn't about finding one perfect, centralized tool. Perhaps it's about composing a resilient and adaptable ecosystem out of many specialized ones.